Welcome to MRL. In this learning session, we'll be studying about statistics. Statistics is a science which deals with extraction of meaningful information from any given data. Statistics as a science, it involves collection of data, organization of data, analysis of data, and interpretation of data so as to get useful and meaningful information. It also involves presenting the data in a manner that the information is extracted easily and is also understood easily. Now, statistics can be used as singularly or plurally, in a plural manner or in a plural sense. Now, statistic means numerical data in a singular sense, but in a plural sense it is a science which involves operations and procedures and the presentation of data so as to get useful information and also to understand the given data easily. Now, to understand statistics, to learn statistics, we have to learn important terms that are related to statistics, the various operations and the procedures of presenting the data, and the methods of presenting the data has to be learnt. Further, we have to learn about central tendency and the different measures of central tendency like mean, median, and mode. Remember that. Now, first let us learn the important terms related to statistics. The first important term is observation. The numerical value of an observed quantity is known as observation. The observations are of same kind and in the same unit. For example, height of a student, if it is 180 centimeters, then it is an observation. So therefore remember, the observation is a numerical value of an observed quantity. Remember that. Now the next one is, the term is the data. A collection of observations of the same kind and in the same unit is a data. For example, when we said height of one student, but if I find out the heights of all the students of a class, then it is a data. Height of one student is an observation. Height of all the students of a class or a school is a data. Now, the data are of different types. We have got raw data, a data which is not arranged or organized and from which we cannot get any useful information is a raw data. Rather, no useful information is available to us from a raw data because it is not processed. Therefore, an unprocessed data is a raw data. Now again we have primary data. The data which is collected by an organization for some specific purpose is known as primary data, and the primary data is reliable and accurate. Remember that. Now we have the next important data is the secondary data, a data which is collected by one organization if used by another organization is known as secondary data. A secondary data is not reliable and not very accurate. However, it is useful for the second organization for its own purpose. Now the next important term is frequency. The number of times a particular observation occurs in a data is known as frequency. If there are 10 students of 180 centimeters height in a class, then the frequency is 10. So frequency is just a count of similar values or same values. Now frequency distribution table, FDT. A frequency distribution table is a table of data. Rather, it is a table of data which is in which the values of the data are written in rows and columns with their corresponding frequency. So FDT has three columns, that is marks or the scores or the values of the data, the tally marks, and the frequency. Now, what are tally marks? Tally marks are an easy and a simple method to mark the counts of observations and know the frequency of observations in a frequency distribution table. And in tally marks, a small vertical line segment it means count of 1, 2 segments count of 2, 3 segments count of 3, 4 segments count of 4, and 4 segments with a slash over them is a count of 5. That makes it easy for us to find out the frequency of the values of data in a frequency distribution table. Now coming to the range, the difference between the highest and the lowest value of observations in a data is known as a range. That is, R is equal to H minus L. H is the highest value, L is the lowest value of a data, and therefore, for example, if you have a given data here, 87, 84, 80, 74, 73, 60, 59, 38, 31 are observations. Now the range is highest minus lowest value. The highest value here is 87, the lowest value is 31, and therefore range of this given data is what 56. Remember that. Now coming to a group. A small count of observations with a certain range from a large data is known as a group. That means if you have a large data, we can take a small group of that data, and that is a small count of observations are taken from that large data, and that forms a group. And a group is nothing but a class interval. Therefore we say a group of data from a large data is known as a class interval. For example, in a class maybe there are 50 to 60 students, but we want to find out the students who have scored the marks between 50 to 60, then that forms a group of the students who have scored the marks between 50 to 60, and that is what is a class interval. So 50 to 60 is a class interval because it forms a group of students who have scored 50 to 60 in a larger data or a larger number of students of a particular class. Now every class interval has class limits. If you see here, 50 to 60 has two limits, 50 and 60, and therefore the upper limit and the lower limit. So we have got the lower limit and the upper limit. The lower limit is 50 and the upper limit is 60. So therefore a class interval has two limits, the lower limit and the upper limit. The lower value of the class interval is known as lower limit. The higher value of class interval is known as upper limit. So in the class interval 50 to 60, 50 is the lower value, it is the lower limit, 60 is the upper value, and it is the upper limit. Therefore every class interval has class limits. Now class size. The class size is class width. It is the range of the class interval. It is the difference between the upper limit and the lower limit of the class interval. For example, in 50 to 60 class interval, the class size is UL upper limit minus lower limit, that is 60 minus 50, that is 10. So the class size of the class interval 50 to 60 is 10 because 60 minus 50 is 10. Now the class mark. The midpoint of a class interval is known as class mark. It is the average value of the lower and the upper limits of a class interval. For example, if you take the class interval 50 to 60, then the class mark is 50 plus 60 divided by 2, and that is 55. Therefore, remember as to what are class intervals, what is class size, and what is class mark. Very, very important, at least when we start learning about the group frequency distribution table later. Now there are different types of class intervals. We have got continuous class intervals, non-continuous class intervals, and exclusive class intervals and inclusive class intervals. Let us study one by one. Now what are continuous class intervals? The class intervals in which the upper limit of one class, please understand, the class intervals in which the upper limit of one class and the lower limit of the subsequent class are the same, then the class intervals are called as continuous class interval. Let us understand this by an example. Now we have the class intervals here 50 to 60 to 60 to 70, 70 to 80. Now the upper limit of the class interval 50 to 60 is 60. The lower limit of 60 to 70 is 60. That means if I consider 50 to 60 as one class interval, then the subsequent class interval is 60 to 70. The upper limit of the class interval and the lower limit of the next class interval are the same, and therefore it is a continuous class interval. Remember that. Now exclusive class intervals. Continuous class intervals are also known as exclusive class intervals. Please remember this. The continuous class intervals are also known as exclusive class intervals. Now the reason is there for that. Now for example, if you take 50 to 60 and 60 to 70, they are continuous class intervals because 60 is the upper limit of the one class interval, and again 60 is the lower limit of the next class interval. Now the question arises, or the confusion arises, where to include 60, whether I have to include 60 in 50 to 60 class interval or include 60 in 60 to 70 class interval. Therefore it has been decided to exclude 60 in the same class interval but include in the next class interval, and therefore it is called as exclusive class interval. So therefore exclusive class intervals means the class intervals in which the upper limit value is excluded from the same class interval but included in the next class interval. So therefore remember, in this class, in this continuous class intervals, count of 60 is excluded from 50 to 60 class interval but is taken in the next class interval, that is 60 to 70, and therefore these are called as exclusive class intervals because 60 is excluded from the same class interval but included in the next class interval. Now coming to the non-continuous class intervals, the class intervals in which the upper limit of a class and the lower limit of the subsequent class are not the same. Please understand this. The class limits in which the upper limit of a class and the lower limit of the subsequent class are not the same, are known as non-continuous class intervals. Let us understand this with an example. If you consider these class intervals 50 to 59 and 60 to 69, 70 to 79, 59 is the upper limit of the first class interval, and the next class interval is 60. So 59 and 60 are not the same here, and therefore they are non-continuous class intervals. And the non-continuous class intervals are also known as inclusive class intervals, because the upper limit of a class interval is included in the same class interval, and therefore they are called as inclusive class intervals. If you observe here, 50 to 59, 60 to 69, 59 is included in the same class interval, 69 is included in the same class interval, and therefore they are the non-continuous class intervals, but also known as inclusive class intervals. Remember this. These are certain basics we have learnt, and very important basics for our application in statistics. Remember these basics, then further we'll learn in the next part the presentation of data, and then further we'll learn about central tendency and the measures of central tendency and so on. So this is a very important part of statistics. Learn these basics. Let us study about the remaining part in our next learning section. Thank you.